saying welcome. Hey, yeah, welcome. Yeah, I let these words flow out like water from a spout.
Stranger Things is the latest Netflix original to be wheeled out after the many successes they've had in the past. Stranger Things centers around a supernatural mystery set in 1980s Indiana and follows the families in the town following the disappearance of young Will Byers. Just from the trailers, we could already feel the 80s aesthetic dripping off the screen, and rest assured that feeling stretches through the whole series. We're talking Trapper Keepers and jean jackets, plus He-Man and tape cassettes, and most of all, riding mother-frogging bikes. So many bikes. If you're looking for a comparison for Stranger Things, you've probably already heard many say E.T., and I like to think of it along the lines of E.T. times Goonies, but with a little more edge and no fear of going into the darker facets of these ideas. They do share quite a few similarities. A group of kids biking around town, having adventures with this weird outsider who they have to teach all about their culture. Except instead of Reese's Pieces, it's Eggos. Netflix has gotten so good at creating the feeling of an extended movie out of a series. Right from the get-go, this show lets you know that their E.T. is not nearly as friendly and much more of a killing machine. As this monster breaks out of some government facility, we're then introduced to our main group of kids along with our first taste of some heavy 80s synth and some sweet D&D play before the night ends and the boys bike home. Unfortunately, Will is run off the road by a mysterious figure and then runs home through the woods. The show already showing off some great horror chops as Will is chased there throughout his home and out back to the shed before disappearing just as the creature closes in on him. Next, we're introduced to Will's mother, Joyce, played by Winona Ryder, who immediately creates an impression and puts so much energy into the role. We also meet her other son, Jonathan, as they both discover Will never returned home the last night. We also meet a down-on-his-luck sheriff who just can't even be bothered to do much work before noon in this sleepy little town. Stranger Things is so many things, and yet it manages to balance them all fantastically, with a boatload of characters to serve and flesh out, while also progressing the mystery of the series. Make that the multiple mysteries of the series. Not to mention they have so many relationships to juggle and different genres to meld, including the 80s feel, along with these horror elements and even some romance. So with so many elements, it's a wonder that this show hits the bullseye as dead on as it does, and with child actors at the center of all of this as well. Stranger Things features so many great performances all around, but Winona Ryder really does steal the show as a grieving mother who begins to descend into lunacy from the outside until it's revealed that she was right all along. She goes to extreme lengths to try and retrieve her boy, all the while practically overpouring with emotion. One of the show's greatest attributes has to be its cohesiveness. Since it is meant to be watched like an 8-hour movie, there are moments all over the story that are so well gelled together, whether it be through flashbacks that mirror the current thread or mirroring scenes in the current story, or even things that they do with the score about how sometimes actions for the characters are foreshadowed by the music they're listening to, and what a great score it is, may I say. The show does a great job of pacing out these things and their characters' stories in relation to one another. After Will goes missing, many of the characters react in different ways and each try to do what they can to help. The gang of boys go out biking and try to find some evidence of Will's disappearance, but instead find Elle, or 11, a mysterious short-haired girl blind to the ways of the world. Mike takes Elle in and tries to help her as much as he can while hiding her from his oblivious parents, all the while learning more about Elle's telekinetic abilities, from slamming doors to making bullies pee themselves, which is barely telekinetic, may I say. All the while, Joyce is tearing out her hair and everything around her, trying to find her boy, until she gets this weird call and hears Will breathing before the phone short-circuits and breaks, which happens again. Shortly after this, she starts to see the lights are flickering irregularly and ends up covering her home in Xmas lights in order to find Will, and eventually she manages to contact Will through the use of these lights before some monster tries to push out of the walls of her house, and Will tells her to run. Sheriff Hopper also is carrying out his own investigation, starting with search parties and eventually trying to track down a boy that he thinks is Will, when it actually turns out to be Elle. He even retraces her steps back to the facility. So while we have these multiple different investigations going on, the show still finds some time to flesh out characters. Characters like those in the high school, like Mike's sister Nancy, who's carrying on a relationship with some Andrew Garfield-looking cool kid named Steve. With so many focus points, the show still gives equal weight and, in turn, makes you as invested in each of their stories because they're primarily to build these characters and their relationships to one another. Whether it be Jonathan and Joyce or Nancy and Steve, each are given the attention they require and tended to expertly. Now, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas clearly have some outstanding chemistry that's on display throughout the whole series, and for once, it wasn't incredibly hard to watch the child actors. They actually did a fantastic job at carrying the series alongside a bevy of other great performances from Nancy to Eleven. It's these performances that carry us through this expansive and ever-changing storyline. It isn't long before the state troopers end up pulling young Will's body from the quarry, which rocks our characters to their core, especially Mike and Joyce, who both lash out at those around them upon hearing the news. However, they don't give up hope. Joyce even goes as far as to denounce the body as something and that it couldn't possibly be her boy despite overwhelming evidence, and yet both find their own signs to continue the search for Will as Hopper learns that this was indeed a cover-up and it is a fake body, that it isn't actually Will. It's also around this time that we start to get our first glimpses of this supernatural monster and how it works. It's at a party that Nance goes to. It's at Steve's house with her friend Barb, that Barb is abducted by the monster and transported to some darker version of the pool that she was in, almost like another dimension, before Barb is dragged away screaming. We also see some kind of portal in the facility that appears to transport people into this darker dimension, but the test subject is quickly dismembered upon entering the gateway. Stranger Things keeps us in the dark just enough throughout the series, while also giving us just enough nuggets to satisfy our curiosity along the way. And one of the great parallels that the show draws is between our real-life adventures alongside with our kids' love of Dungeons & Dragons, whether it be the naming of the monster as the demagogue, or one of the creatures they fight in the game, or the Veil of Shadows, which is the closest thing to this darker dimension we witnessed not too long ago. And if that's where Will's trapped, then there has to be some kind of gateway. And right on cue, Hopper reaches the point in his investigation where he sneaks into the facility to try and find Will, but instead finds this ever-important gateway without truly even realizing what he's found. But upon his discovery, he's chloroformed and wakes back up home surrounded by pills and alcohol, as if to make him think it was all a dream. But after finding a bug in his light, not a bug, I mean obviously a bug, he knows he wasn't dreaming and goes off the radar to avoid them anymore. But it's already past the funeral, meaning there's no way to show the body was fake anymore. But luckily, Hopper finally rejoins Joyce and tells her about the fake body, once again restoring hope to her cause. All the while, the boys and Elle are trying to locate the gateway by way of following their compasses toward this over-magnified gateway, but Elle knows that would mean going back to the facility that was danger for all of them as well as her, that we've seen in a lot of the flashbacks of her story, of Dr. Brenner and how she pretty much grew up there thinking that he was her father, how he subjected her to all of these tests for some kind of future of science, he said, but always in the nature and the best interest of himself rather than her. And she ends up messing with their compasses to try and redirect them in some way, but Lucas calls her out for it, which leads to Mike and him fighting before Elle throws Lucas away, which only makes Mike yell at Elle and scare her away, entirely scattering the group and fracturing them. And while the boys are looking for this gateway, Nancy is trying to find her best friend Barb, and she ends up working with Jonathan after learning that he was there that night she disappeared, taking pictures. They see a creature in this picture, the same kind of creature that his mother had described, and they decide to go out hunting for the thing in the woods. And it's in the woods that Nancy discovers some kind of secondary gateway in a tree into the realm of shadows, and comes face to no face with the demagogue as it feeds on a deer carcass. Luckily, she manages to evade the thing long enough to find her way back to the real world and to Jonathan. And then they return to Nancy's home and console each other, which is seen by Steve, of course. And Nancy says she doesn't want to be alone tonight. And when Jonathan goes to sleep on the floor, she calls him up to the sleep beside her on the bed. These are really some great moments between these two, and it's clear to see how shaken up they both are by this horrific experience and the thought that their friends and family are probably going through these same experiences as they speak. But they do at least develop a theory that this thing must be attracted to blood, much like a shark. And back with the boys, the gang is fractured after their fight, but they still aren't on the same page. Once again, the range on display from them is far beyond what most other child actors could bring to the table. And so they split up. Mike and Dustin head off to find Elle, but instead run into the bullies they've been dealing with at school. They end up being chased to the quarry, and they force Mike to jump off the cliff, but Elle comes to the rescue and flies him back to land before breaking the bully's arm in an incredibly cathartic experience and reuniting with her friends. But unfortunately, Lucas discovers the facility and sees Dr. Brenner gearing up to come find Elle. And so the boys hop on their bikes and head for the hills, literally. We're treated to a heart-pounding chase scene straight out of E.T. that culminates in Elle flipping one of the vans over the top and blocking the road, just one of the many memorable shots in the series. It's shortly after this that our characters start to realize they're on the same show, and they start coming together. They hatch a plan to amplify Elle's ability with a giant tub so she can get in contact with Barb and Will, which she does. Unfortunately, it's only the latter who's alive. And so Sheriff Hopper and Joyce decide they have to get to this gateway. They have to find Will. They head to the facility, who Hopper says, I can get this in here, I've done this before, and are immediately captured. But Hopper ends up convincing them that they should send him in to find the boy because they don't really think they'll find him, and they just assume that they'll die. So they go into this darker dimension, and they're looking for Will in this little fort he has in the woods that they know he's there, but it's already destroyed. So they start heading for Joyce's house when they hear screaming that originates because Nancy and Jonathan also decide to leave the school and go try to kill this monster because they already have all this monster hunting equipment. They go to their house, they set up a trap with a bear trap and some gasoline, and they have a gun, and they have what is kind of a Lucille, except it's got nails in it, like it's on Dead Rising or something. They set up this trap, and Steve shows up, of course. Steve shows up and he's like, what's going on? Why are you bleeding? What's happening? Oh my God, what is this? House looks crazy. What's going on? And then the monster shows up and he is losing his mind. They try to set off the trap, but they only get a few shots off, really. And then they go back out there again. Steve leaves, but then he comes back, starts bashing the thing with the baseball bat. They get it in the trap, they light it on fire, and that's what draws Joyce and Hopper to the house. They do put a lot of damage into this thing. Before Jonathan starts putting its fire out with a fire extinguisher, like, what the hell, dude? That was your whole plan. But whatever, because it's already gone back to this other dimension. So now Joyce and Hopper are trying to track this thing down to try and find Will, and they track it to this library where it appears he's been cocooning a bunch of people as it's abducted these things from the town. And they find Barb, who is already dead. And they find Will, who's got this tentacle all the way down his throat. They pull it out. They start doing CPR. They think they're going to lose him. It's spliced with flashbacks of Hopper losing his daughter. And he saves him. Thank goodness. I mean, that was such an emotional moment. Executed so well. And they actually saved Will. After all this time, he actually looks like he made it. And so then we head back to the school where Dr. Brenner and his goons have come to take Elle away. And they try to run. The boys are running with Elle and get surrounded. And Elle drops a bunch of them, but then she herself drops. But then there's a lot of blood in the hallways, and this monster comes pouring out of the wall, just tearing people apart left and right. And I will say, really creates a rather disappointing end for Dr. Brenner. He just kind of dies almost off screen. It really felt anticlimactic for his entire role in the series, but whatever, at least he died. And then the boys and the girl and Elle end up barricading themselves in a room, and Elle has to sacrifice herself to save the boys. It's incredibly emotional after this entire 8 hours to watch her do this for people she didn't even know before, and to watch Mike's reaction, who really gotten very close to loving her, as she's the only girl who's ever really given him the time of day or understood him at all. He thought that she would be a part of his life for the future, but then she was just ripped away from him so quickly, and it was just incredibly sad. We end up moving forward a little bit of time, and Will's in the hospital, and it looks like he's recovering. We get some great moments, some actual light moments that we needed after all of this horror. And it's much welcome. Jonathan, Joyce, Mike, Lucas, everybody, Dustin, everyone's excited and happy that Will actually made it back. But this is Stranger Things, and the strangeness isn't over, because then we get Hopper walking out to the car that was watching him and hopping in, and then we cut to a month later, and it's Christmas, and we're playing D&D again. It's a nice connection to the earlier scene. This time, he does use the fireball without hesitation, and they kill the whatever the heck Hydra thing, and it's just incredibly cathartic to see that where they came from and where they are now. And it looks like Nancy is dating Steve again, which I didn't see exactly coming, but she also has this kind of connection with Jonathan. It's just really nice to see. But we do get some teases for what could be a Stranger Things season 2. I mean, Will is definitely changed. We get a scene of him in the bathroom, and it looks like he still has some kind of connection to the realm of shadows. He sees it when the light's going off or something. He's puking up slugs. And then we get Hopper going out to the woods and giving Elle what looks like some kind of little package. So maybe she didn't really completely die. Maybe she just banished herself to this realm of shadows and she can't get back or something. The story had a really great pace to it, a lot of mystery, and a lot like Jaws, another Spielberg, that it kind of hid the monster, made you rely on the characters more and the stories in this little town, and then built the monster into it, and it really did go to a great place and have a really great resolution. I think it was a great story, and even if there isn't a season 2, I think this stands alone as just another fantastic piece of content from Netflix. And Winona Ryder really did steal the show. Now, there were some downsides, obviously, but most of these downsides were just so that we could have those moments later on, to space out the story. I mean, that's why Jonathan stopped taking pictures right as Barbara was abducted, and then we waited a long time before they actually ended up looking at that specific point in the picture. Maybe that's why Jonathan used the fire extinguisher. There are moments where they just had to, get it to at least 8 episodes, so they had to do that. But overall, I found this series to be completely satisfying and awesome to watch, and really the perfect amount of episodes for sure. If I were to give this a rating, I'd probably hover around 9.0 out of 10. I think it earned that 9. This is certainly an A series. I thought it was fantastic. I mean, the characters, the storyline, the atmosphere, the score, there are really just so many fantastic elements to this series, and there are only a couple moments where I wasn't satisfied or I didn't buy what was happening, and most of those moments were just because they wanted to save those moments for later. I thought that it was really awesome, and they even did a great job of teasing the next season, which I wasn't even thinking about for most of the series. I completely recommend it. If you like Goonies, if you like E.T., you will love this. They nailed it. They nailed E.T. almost more than E.T. did. I think it's fantastic, and you should go see this. Anyways, this has been Movie Mammoth. If you like this video, leave a like, leave a subscribe. You'll get more TV, movie, music news from me here. Until then, I'll just have to head on back to my cave. See y'all.